Welcome to our seminar, Interviewing the Interviewer, about how to achieve excellence by asking the questions that get answers. This American University Science Seminar is the fifth and the last in a series aimed at empowering truth, given at a moment in our nation when truth is in trouble. Over the next hour, we'll first consider what makes an interview successful, watch an example of what can go wrong, and get 8 tips, hard won, that might help your interviews go right. Then we'll open up to subjects you would like to ask about, as there has been some interest expressed in my offering virtual office hours open to any curious American University student, and indeed anyone listening who wants to know more about working in journalism from this former network global correspondent. You'll also be able to ask questions directly on camera if you let us know you're interested in the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screens, or you can submit your written questions there. The co-producers of this final seminar, Myra Patrick and Zachary Hill, and I sincerely hope that you discover something useful from what is said today. Okay, let's get started. Before we get to why do journalists matter and how to become one, a few words about why interviewing skills matter and how to get excellent at getting answers. An interview, a conversation that gathers information, is actually not so much about the interview subject or the interviewer. It's actually what happens between them, what's unleashed when one feels that another is truly listening to what he or she has to say. It's a kind of magic, as it can unleash a statement or a story that can surprise or be a revelation even to the person who is speaking. More than once, I've heard an interview subject say, "This is the first time I've ever said this to anyone," or "I'm only just now realizing this." Interviews are so essential that journalists have to do at least, well, an average, I would say, 3 to 6 to gather information needed for just one day of their story. Thinking back, yes, there are interviews that you will do with the powerful and the influential, the famous and the infamous, but the vast majority are with the lesser known, people from all walks of life, even from other countries, who know something about a story you need to tell. And in this, you might count yourself lucky. For those who are rarely heard, often have the most to say. Your interviews will add up. For example, roughly calculated, in more than 35 years of journalism, I've conducted at least 36,540 interviews so far. And it's fair to say that that's a pretty conservative estimate, as long-form stories, for example, documentaries or magazine pieces, often require far more interviews than average. The Atlantic magazine science reporter Ed Young says that he spoke to 100 experts in just the first 5 months of covering the coronavirus pandemic. So how do you get truly excellent at it and to get the answers? As interviewers such as Oriana Fallaci, Mike Wallace, Leslie Stahl, Oprah Winfrey, Charlie Rose, and Terry Gross have done. Well, we've got 8 tips for your consideration that have worked pretty well for me. And you can consider them and take them for what they're worth. Number 1, above all, prepare. Research and read every good source of information you can get your hands on about your interview subject and about the topics you will be asking about. Watch videos of the subject if possible to learn how he or she speaks and answers questions. Understand, if you can, what your subject cares about and is motivated by. Doing this kind of homework not only allows you to ask more precise questions, it lets your interview subject know that you value your time with him or her enough to be informed. And knowing that you're not clueless also allows them to relax a little bit. Number 2, connect. Before the interview, in fact, begins if possible. More than being welcoming and grateful, try to be authentic so your interview subject can see that you are someone he or she can speak with. Once, the day before interviewing Brad Pitt, I broke my nose. So there I was sitting across from him, very embarrassed because my nose was swollen twice its size and had taken on a shade of blue. But I think it was because I allowed myself to be vulnerable when admitting that I had broken it while stupidly running into a locked revolving door, not watching where I was going. It was because of that, I think, that he softened and as a result gave me a better interview. Number 3, listen earnestly. If your interview subject knows you are paying attention, motivated to openly hear their point of view without obvious bias, he or she will speak more frankly. How well you listen directly influences how much your interview subject decides to reveal. Number 4, wait. Don't rush to fill a pause. When you hear something compelling, let it blossom. Allow the moment your interview subject needs to collect a thought or feel an emotion. That moment often leads to a deeper truth. Oprah, in particular, as you can see from her work, is highly skilled at this. Number 4, repeat. If your subjects are saying something important to the interview, but either don't seem to want to answer the question or are struggling to find the words, sometimes just repeating what they have said can encourage them to articulate what they are thinking. For example, if someone says, I'm not sure where it happened, pause, and you say, you're not sure where it happened. There is a chance a memory will be jogged, or the interview subject will then be moved to become more forthcoming. Number 5, follow up. If you are hearing something important, ask for details. Who, what, where, when, why, or how, to get context or help verify what is being said. In this way, we see the interview as a way to document what the speaker is saying about the facts of the story. Number 6, challenge. When you hear something that sounds untrue, double back, ask for evidence, ask the question again, maybe in a different way for clarity. You might discover something you didn't know. If, however, you know your interview subject is lying, you might need to call him or her on it. You can ask, why aren't you telling the truth? It is your responsibility as a journalist to not perpetuate a lie. So reporting about what the subject said needs to be reported in that context. Number 7, respect. You will increase significantly your chances of getting answers if you can treat every interview subject with some basic human dignity, even if you're asking tough questions of tough characters. For example, when interviewing Omar al-Bashir, the president of Sudan, who was at the time accused of genocide in Darfur, I found that even while looking him in the eye and asking him why he was murdering his own people, I got better answers if I didn't lose my cool and maintained a human connection. Number 8, and finally, whenever possible, relax. Yes, interviewing can be exceedingly stressful. It can also be fun. But if you can take a breath, knowing you have prepared your questions, done your research, and gotten into your game frame, chances are better your interview subject will also be more relaxed, which will get you the answers you seek. Of course, this is not to say that if you follow all of these suggestions, an interview can't go wrong. Consider, for example, this clip of what happened when Gayle King, an experienced interviewer, questioned the singer-songwriter R. Kelly in 2019 about accusations of abuse by several women.
And correct me if I'm wrong, that you have never held anybody against their will.
I don't need to. Why would I?
Well,
How stupid would it be for R. Kelly, with all I've been through in my way past, to hold somebody, let alone 4, 5, 6, 50, you said. Why? How stupid would I be to do that?
I didn't say you were
That's
holding.
stupid, guys.
I didn't.
Is this camera on me?
Yes. It's on.
That's stupid. Use your common sense. Don't forget the blogs. Forget how you feel about me. Hate me if you want to, love me if you want, but just use your common sense. How stupid would it be for me to, with my crazy past and what I've been through, right now I just think I need to be a monster and hold girls against their will, chain them up in my basement, and don't let them eat and don't let them out unless they need some shoes down the street from their uncle.
Robert,
stop it. Y'all quit playing. Quit playing.
Robert.
I didn't do this stuff. This is not me. I'm fighting for my life. Y'all killing me with this. I got 30 years of my career.
Robert.
30 years of my career. Y'all trying to kill me. You're killing me, man. This is not about music. I'm trying to have a relationship with my kids, and I can't do it. Y'all just don't want to believe the truth. You don't want to believe it.
No, what's notable is how seemingly calm Gail was. She stayed in her seat, she maintained her composure, she stayed focused, and she was focused on saving the interview, she later said. You can also see there's something similar in how Leslie Stahl handled the moment when President Trump abruptly ended his interview with her in 2020. And she was trying to get him back into the chair to answer her questions. What helped both interviewers in the moment was already knowing from their research that their interview subjects were unpredictable when faced with answering difficult questions. So it's about being prepared, although perhaps nothing could really prepare you completely. The more prepared you are, the better you will be at handling when things go wrong. It is, however, exceedingly rare for things to go off the rails in interviews. But when they do, there are a few other things you can try. You can stay respectful, remembering it's not about you, it's about gathering information. You can remember that your interview subject, you can remind your interview subject about the reason he or she agreed to be interviewed in the first place. And this is a way of getting them and getting the interview back on track, getting the focus right. And if all of that fails to save an interview, you can say, my question has clearly made you uncomfortable. How would you put it? What would you like to say about this? This is a way of letting them feel some control and letting them speak about the subject that you're trying to get them to answer. And that's interesting. And interestingly, that often can lead to actually information that can be surprisingly important and good. So that's been useful to me. Interviewing, often can feel like mining for gold. Okay, so I perhaps have said enough. So now I'm going to let it, we're going to make a turn and let you, invite you to interview the interviewer. And I promise I will stay in my chair. So first, we're joined by a panel of students who are journalism students, including graduate students Anna Alvarez and John Seward, and also undergraduate Malika Ravindran. And so Anna, let's begin with you. Do you have a comment or a question about what you heard or about interviewing in general?
I do. Thank you so much for the time to letting me interview the interviewer. It's about one of the points that you made, specifically, I think this can touch up on respect. And during your throughout your career, you've interviewed people that have gone through difficult situations, in delicate situations. So how do you prepare for interviews that are about delicate topics? And moreover, how do you ask delicate questions and make your source open up enough to answer them?
So delicate, I would put in a category that's more about sensitivity, right? You're talking about sensitive questions, and this is a very, oftentimes in journalism, you're talking to people you don't know very well. Maybe you've never even met them, about in some of their, sometimes in some of their worst moments. They've just they've experienced something really difficult, traumatic, and you're interviewing them, right, about it. And I've seen this over and over again, whether it's covering the earthquake in Haiti or the tsunami in Southeast Asia or in Japan, all kinds of disasters, or just talking to people who are struggling with a sudden terrible bit of news. And I would say that I think it's important. One of the foundational rules in journalism, what defines journalism is different from other kinds of media, is sort of a little regarded. It's about humanity, to try to not do harm, right? This is, journalism, in telling the truth, sometimes will cause harm to someone who's maybe lying or doing something wrong, but you're trying to limit that harm. So if someone is in a really traumatic situation, you have to be cognizant of that, right? And so I think it's easiest, probably a way to answer this question is to sort of put the shoe on the other foot, put it on your foot. How would you want your mother to be interviewed under these circumstances? How would you want your sister to be interviewed under these circumstances, or your brother? You would want that person if your mother or your brother or your sister wanted to be interviewed and they wanted to answer the questions, you would want the interviewer to ask the questions in a manner that you can imagine. Tell me about what happened. Open-ended questions really helps under these circumstances. A sensitive listening, not interrupting, letting them speak completely, and probing, but being careful not to further damage. I've found people handle sensitive questions differently. Some people really struggle, and some people really need to tell you what happened because they want to get it off of their chest. So to assume is a mistake, that everyone is going to react the same way. That's another thing I would say. Number two, I remember being a very young reporter, not really having a lot of experience, and being sent to cover a funeral for a young woman who had been killed, and I put my camera, I was outside the church because reporters weren't allowed in. I was pretty far from the church. And all of a sudden the father marched from the church toward me, furious. He was furious. How dare you come here to cover, the funeral for my daughter? How disrespectful are you? And he was really shouting, his face was red. And I felt terrible. And I remember saying, sir, I understand and I respect your emotions. And if you would like for me to leave, I will leave. And I didn't have to legally leave, but I just didn't want to continue his pain. But I said, I'm here for a reason. We don't know who killed your daughter. And I'm here because I'm going to try to help the investigation, cover the story so people know that they know that you don't know who killed your father or your daughter, and the police investigation is continuing. And that's why I'm here. I'm reporting about this. And he stopped and he said, okay. And then at that point, I was actually over time embraced by the family. They started to want to talk to me. In other words, it's really how you handle it, right? If you can handle with respect and with sensitivity, with humanity, people see that, and then they understand. If they understand your motivation is pure and earnest, they will, even if they are. I've interviewed tyrants, but who understood that I was fair, understood that I was going to hear them and listen, and that I was going to be a human being. I've had dictators, all kinds of people say yes. because people want to be heard. They want to be able to express what's really happening. Even after just experiencing losing everything, people want to be heard. And I think if you can just make a space, and I think every one of us as human beings can understand how to make that space. How would you make that space for the people you care about? You know, how would you make that space for anyone? How would you want that space be made for you? That's how you find your answer. I hope that answered your question, and I know went on and on about that, but that was a very good question. I kind of haven't thought about that in a while. So, John, do you have a comment or a question?
Yeah, I think it actually follows up with Anna's question quite nicely. I noticed in some of the photos that you were showing earlier that you had a head covering on. And while my wife was deployed, there were some very similar expectations for her as well. And I just wanted to know how, as an interviewer, especially when you're trying to get to the bottom of a story, you balance asking poignant questions with sort of that cultural deference.
Well, that certainly was, that really came into play interviewing Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, who was then the president of Iran. And I don't know how much you guys know about the Green Revolution, but you may know a lot about it because it was all over Twitter. It was a lot of young people your age who were in the streets trying to promote certain candidates in the presidential election. And there was a lot of violence that happened. They were disappearing, they were being beaten up. There were videos of people being beaten up. There was a video of a young woman named Neda who was actually killed on camera. And so the interview came right after that. And this is a president also who had been accused of denying the Holocaust, although he later denied he said that, and who, was someone who was not playing ball with the rest of the world. So he was seen as a pretty tough character. And I went in, and I'll tell you just a kind of in a little inside baseball, but in Iran, a woman is not allowed to, she's supposed to not only cover her hair, she's supposed to cover her neck, she's supposed to cover her arms, your legs, and even if you wear a suit, the jacket should cover your bottom. This is a culture that where women are, sort of, there are many women who wear complete chadors, which cover everything. If the people who are very religious, but not all women are very religious there. And in the past, in history, in Iran, women did not have veils in the 1960s and I believe 50s before the revolution. So obviously we're talking about the ancient Persian Empire that is now Iran. So going into that situation, I was really aware of all that, and I'd also met Iranian women who did wear chadors, who talked to me about how they were actually pleased to wear chadors and the full covering and why. So I had a lot of information. So going in, I recognize how women, but we should also say that in Iran, women are in high positions of power as well. They're not the president, but they're in top positions inside the government. So it's a very interesting, not exactly as you assume it, kind of point of view about how women should and should not behave. So knowing all this stuff and not sort of being simple-minded about it, but having a depth of knowledge about it, at least to the degree that I could, I went in to do the interview, but I decided that while I would conform with the cultural requirements, because I was in Iran, and it was illegal for me to actually, although they might have given me a space since I was an Iranian, but still it would have technically been illegal for me to not cover my head. I decided to conform. I was wearing a pair of pants, I wore a dress over the pair of pants, and I wore a jacket over the dress. So, I mean, I was top to bottom, right? And it was hot, it was summer, it was during that particular interview. So to answer your question, it's a long setup. Again, I'm giving you kind of the research part, right? Now to the interview, to answer your question, I decided that I would conform in terms of this, but I wouldn't conform in terms of what the questions were going to be. The questions were going to be, as I would ask the questions, I have a tendency to, as you've heard from my list, care a lot about treating my interview subjects with a certain dignity. So here's a little more background, just a little bit more. Ahmadinejad had not been successfully interviewed by a Western journalist, I think, ever before my interview. People would, he was a kind of interview where he would make people really upset. And you'd see, he would just clam up, and people would show a picture of the Holocaust and say, how can you deny the Holocaust? And he'd just say, what are you doing? In other words, the question is, do you want the drama of the question or do you want the answer? You have to make a choice. You can ask a lot of questions of people and get the drama of the question, or you can get answers. And that's a choice you got to make. I decided I wanted answers. So I treated him with dignity as a human being. And he saw that. And I asked him tough questions. And then I asked him a question that was just a human question. Mr. President, you are a father. And, you profess that you care about your people. So what was your reaction when you saw the young woman, Neda, killed on camera, attending, a Green Revolution protest, as a human being? What was your reaction? And that was probably one of the most, that was a hugely newsmaking interview. It was in the New York Times. I believe the Washington Post and the Wall Street. It was just a huge, huge interview. The entire interview was run on MSNBC at one point. It was in all the broadcasts, and other networks picked it up because he said so much. But one of the most important things, he actually started to get emotional because he had seen the Neda footage. And he reacted to that in a manner that was not seen as being okay for the president of Iran. In fact, when I finished the interview, the Iranian supreme leader, who is above the president, who really sort of runs a lot of the nuclear program, for example, is run by him, he came out publicly criticizing me. He said that I had won the interview because I had let my hijab slip and showed my hair, that I had manipulated the president into seeing that I was a woman, and as a result, I got more answers. So it really speaks to how it was. But what did I do? I asked questions respectfully as a human being, tough questions, human questions, in a manner that didn't forget that even despite all the things he'd been accused of, he is a human being. And I'm not going to get answers from a wall or a rock I'm going to get answers from another human being. So I have to look at him. And the hardest part for me, I think, in the hardest one to ever do was the one when I interviewed Omar al-Bashir, the president of Sudan, who's accused of genocide in Darfur. It took me about 3 days of just getting my head straight. How do you talk to someone accused of genocide? How do you ask questions of someone accused of genocide? This was very hard. I had to really get my brain in that zone. Because am I going to ask him questions so that I look good and sound good, or am I going to ask questions and get answers? And I decided the most important thing you can do, and I think every interviewer should think about, is to get answers, because that is the job. The job is to get answers. So, and sometimes, it's funny, I'll just to kind of say that you can, as I talked about the Brad Pitt example, another example, I, was trying to interview somebody and I spilled something. In other words, you showing you being human will let them know that you're human, And then they will be more likely. It's happened because I make mistakes all the time. So I'm sure there are many times I've showed people how human I am. But the point is that people will respond, and not to do it on purpose or but to just connect. So I think that, does that answer your question, John?
It does. I'll ask a follow-up if that's okay.
Sure.
It sounds like for all of the attention that we pay to sort of our staging and our technical production of interviews, that sometimes the interviewer's emotional preparation might be just as important. Is that accurate?
I think you want to get into a game frame. Absolutely. Not always do you have time to do that. You know, if you're doing a day of air story, you're calling a bunch of people, the interviews can be on the phone and you're just gathering data. But if you're doing a significant interview that's significant for your reporting, whether it's an interview subject, you know, you've gone into a war zone and you are in a situation where you're talking to a soldier and you have no real preparation except that you've studied about the war and blah blah, and you're coming in a situation, you have an opportunity to interview somebody. You know, are you in the game frame? And the game frame is, you know, you're asking to get answers. You're trying to use all of your senses to sort of collect information so that you can decide how best to answer the question, right? How best that's going to best get you, most likely get you answers. And I think that's really how you have to operate. I think realizing that it's that it's about data, getting the story. It's not about you. It's not about how you feel. If you're too much into yourself and you're thinking about yourself, you're not going to do a good job. You have to get out of yourself. It's like when you play pick up. Say you're playing a game or something. When you're not, you're gonna do a better job when you're thinking about all your senses are open to everything. When you're not thinking about how you're performing or judging yourself, you're really focused on contributing. How in this case, how can I gather this information? So you think about the job, you stop thinking about yourself. But beforehand, if you do have time to prepare, especially for the really hard ones, it's emotionally difficult to interview a person accused of genocide or a victim. To be in the game frame is like, if you're too self-focused or too distracted, you may not get the interview. You may not get the information from the interview. To really listen to someone, especially someone suffering, as Anna talked about, really listening is one of the great gifts you can give someone, I think, in general. And if they want to express a story, there's a little girl who I interviewed in the Central African Republic who had lost her family in the ethnic cleansing there. And just a little girl, she was, I think, only maybe 11 and maybe 10 or 11. And, I'm interviewing a child. She has a family member. She's in a camp where she's safe. And so you have to really be careful. Okay, how do I ask this question? How do I make sure it's going to be okay? And creating a safe circumstance. And she gave a beautiful interview, this little girl, because I asked her just a few questions, and she said, I said something like, essentially, what happened? How, what did you think? And suddenly she said, I just raised my hand and asked God, please protect my family. Please don't let this happen. And then, she's looking up at heaven, and then a tear falls down her face, and she said, and they still took my family, my parents away, or they still killed my parents, something like that. So it was almost like it was just under the surface. I asked what happened. It comes out. So understanding and yet not, being careful about not adding, especially for children or the vulnerable. You don't ever want to walk away having gotten a great interview out of somebody and hurt them if they're vulnerable already to begin with. right? So you have a responsibility. There's a lot of responsibility. I actually find all this responsibility as overwhelming as it can be. I find it actually something that you can measure up to, right? Try to measure up to the challenge of taking care of other people, hearing other people's stories, and documenting the truth. It's a great challenge. I think it's something that's worth your time. If I'm saying it right. Okay, Malika, your turn. What's your question or comment?
Yeah, so it actually is a little bit of a follow-up to John's question. So in the tips that you provided earlier, you had explained that journalists should do in-depth research before heading into interviews, but finding unbiased sources is often difficult. And I know that you have mentioned before that you miss the truth in news. So how do you think that young and new journalists can learn which sources to trust and which to avoid when preparing for interviews?
Yeah, I think almost always you treat all your sources as being biased. I mean, I think that you always are asking yourself, what's their point of view? What's their motivation? You know, why are they saying this? You're always questioning whatever is coming at you. You know, you're always doing that. The question is, are they accurate? Whether they're biased or not is not really so much something I'm going to control, or I'm only going to find somebody who's unbiased. I'm going to try to find out if they're accurate. That's the number one question. Are they in a position to know what happened? Are they in a position to actually, why are you talking to them? That's really, why talk to this person? You know, if you're covering politics, of course you're talking to people who are absolutely biased. But when they say this, they say X. Well, then you have to say, why is this person saying X? You know, and then you ask them to verify why they're saying that, or to back it up, the who, what, where, when, why, how. You are constantly asking the questions to check the facts, because your job is not to report bias. Your job is to report verifiable facts. Verifiable facts. And if you can't verify them, if they're not verifiable, then you need to then you need to attribute to those who would know or are good sources. In other words, are in a position to have knowledge about the story you're reporting, or have influence on the story you're reporting. Those are your sources. You don't interview the guy who heard about the car crash. You interview the guy who saw the car crash or was in the car crash, right? So, and if you can't attribute, if you're having to go off the record, especially, which happens a lot in political reporting, then you have to figure out, what are your rules? My rules are, if three people, if I'm going to go with unverifiable information because it's off the record, then I'm going to require myself to get three people to go off the record. I need to confirm it off the record with three people before I report it. That was my rule. Unless they're the president of the United States, or they're in a position where it's absolutely verifiably true. If, for example, the president of your university is about to cancel all classes for the fall semester, and he tells me that off the record, or she tells me that off the record, then I can probably say off the record, an anonymous source, blah, 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 because I know that person is in a position to know what's going on. But beyond that, it's really the rule of three. That now, not everybody follows that, but the reason I believe in following that is because if you don't, you're going to increase your chances of reporting information that may be incorrect. When people hide behind, I don't want to be revealed who I am. Oftentimes it's a way, it's a way not just of protecting themselves, but oftentimes it's a way of manipulating the story. So you just have to be very careful about that. So in terms of, back to your question, in terms of bias, I think you just assume everyone is biased about everything. Even there's an old adage, if your mother tells you she loves you, check it out. That's how journalists think. If your mother tells me she loves me, if my mother tells me she loves me, I have to check it out. Yeah, you do. I mean, that's kind of how journalists think. And it's not I used to think, wow, this seems like not a great way to, but if you're defending the truth, that is the job, isn't it? You are a defender of the truth. So you have to constantly be thinking about, how do I make sure that it is true? That's the job. That's the job of the journalist. Okay, let me just say that if you panelists could stand by, I think what we want to do now, because I'm realizing that the time is moving very quickly, I think we should bring in our seminar co-producers, and we want to sort of invite everyone who's listening to ask questions as well. What we want to do is say, if you have any questions about interviewing or about any other subject that you'd like to talk about, you can ask these questions directly by letting us know via the Q&A icon below at the bottom of your screen that you'd like to do so. Just let us know you'd like to ask a question directly live and join our conversation. Or you can submit a question in writing, also via the Q&A icon. And our co-producers, Zach Hill and Myra Patrick, are going to be joining us now, yay, to open up this conversation to virtual office hours, to any other subject that you'd like to ask about. Before we do that, I'm not sure you have questions already, guys. Well, maybe you do. Let's see if you do. Myra?
So we have a question from Sophie from the School of Public Affairs, and she would like to go live.
Okay, Sophie.
Hi, Anne. Thanks so much for having me and letting me start off with this first question. So I just wanted to ask, for students interested in journalism, what technical production skills are most valuable, and how should students go about picking them up? And then also, if you think that technical skills, the nitty-gritty stuff, is important for everyone to learn, even the interviewer, even the people in production.
Well, I would say that that yes, it's important to have technical skills. The most important skill any journalist can have, number one, above all things, is to know how to write. That's number one, because you'll be writing all the time, whether you go into broadcasting or any other kind of journalism, you'll be writing. But in terms of, I think you're talking about technical skills regarding technology, and in that case, what happens is it's very hard to get really good at all of the skills that you're required to have, that you may be required to have. I guess I would say that if you can be good at one or two, that would be really excellent, having a sense of all of them, because I think the future is going to not be about just doing the work in your niche, whether it's being on camera or being a researcher. I think it's really, the future is going to require us to be all those things. So you may not have to edit your own, technically edit your videotape, for example, but knowing how it works would be helpful. Knowing how to run a video camera would be helpful. Knowing how to use a microphone and all those things would be helpful. So I remember my first job, I was the camera woman. In fact, I was a one-person team, so I had a camera and I had to go put the microphone or the light stand. I would put it where I would be doing my stand-up, and I would zoom in with my camera to make sure it was in focus. And then I'd go over to the light stand, push the light stand down, and do my stand-up. It's the point where I'm speaking to camera or going live, hoping that I was in focus, because otherwise it wouldn't have happened. So I think that those kinds of things, though, are relatively, you learn those really to some degree on the job, some of these skills. But if you can get good at some of them, I think it's probably very helpful. I'll answer the question another way, Sophie. When I've gone into very difficult, dangerous stories, one of my rules was that I didn't want everyone to feel compelled to move closer, deeper towards the danger if they felt unsafe. And so one of the things I did was I picked up a still camera and became a photographer, in part because if my cameraman did not want to go deeper towards danger, then I could still take pictures. And I also chose a cameraman who, if I felt afraid, could still be able to ask questions. In other words, having an ability to do each other's job kind of increases in those, under those circumstances, the safety and the effectiveness. But in general, teams tend to have specialists, and it would be a mistake to not have some specialty, to think about one thing that you're really good at and you're knowledgeable about the others, right? I think that's probably the way I would answer the question. Does that answer your question, Sophie?
Yes, that's great. Thank you so much.
Okay, all right. Okay, well, why don't you hang out? I want to also, I'll go to Zach and see if there are any other video questions or written questions.
Yes, I believe we have a live question coming from Kathy.
Hi, Kathy. We'll give her a second to turn on her camera and turn on her mic if she's there. How about, why don't we come back to Kathy in just a minute, and
Yeah.
And maybe what we can do is ask Anna if she has another question.
I did. This one is related more to your experience reporting, and you have covered climate change, human rights topics. You've gone to conflict zones. So among all of these and many other topics that you have covered and endured, what has been the most challenging topic to cover and why?
I think war has been probably the most challenging topic to cover, because especially asymmetrical war, Syria was extremely challenging. Just physically, because of the dangers. Somalia, probably also another asymmetrical war, violence. I think keeping your team safe is extremely stressful. Kosovo was also very difficult. But I think, I guess the best thing I should probably say is that as difficult as some of these stories can be and challenging as they can be in terms of simply staying safe, I think that whatever subject you're covering, whether it's a story that's difficult to do because of the danger, or it's difficult to document because of just how difficult it is to tell that story. Climate change, for example, when I was doing it, was a difficult story to document because people were saying a lot of the reporting was about the politics of it. And people were not necessarily making the connection between the fires and climate change and, the polar vortex and climate change. And we were part of the early end to kind of make those connections in our reporting, to visualize it. It's a little hard to document. It's hard to document something that's coming at you, right? But whatever the challenge, keeping a clear focus on the purpose, right? Why are you doing this? Why are you in a war zone? It's not about it. What is the purpose? And staying focused on that, at the same time being flexible about whether that focus should change because of the demands of the story. But nevertheless, staying focused and being precise about where you take your team and how you keep them safe, or how you direct their talents and their creativity, will help you get the story. Ultimately, it's about that. It's not, and I think if you can have that kind of purpose and meaning in the work, you will be more successful no matter what the difficulty is.
And I know
Okay.
there are other people that had the Q&A, but just a follow-up question. When you were describing covering conflict, you touched upon mental health. So how do you deal with your mental health when covering difficult topics like conflicts and war?
Sure, I think that's a very good question. Oftentimes there isn't a system when you work for a company or that they will have something for you. So I think you ultimately, I would always come back feeling a little bit bummed, often very bummed. I would allow myself a few days of being depressed, to be honest with you. It's difficult to come back from a place where people have nothing to hearing your children happy and wanting to go to the zoo, right? It's a big shift. So the things that I would do is expect that I would have several days where I needed to process and to take care of myself emotionally, whether it was talking to people who do the similar work, colleagues, whether it's talking to a therapist or someone if you needed to, just sort of emotionally dealing with that, processing what you've seen, making sure that your reporting reflects that, and then taking care of yourself mentally, reminding yourself of the purpose, as I mentioned earlier, of the work. Why are you doing this? Did what you just do, was it in line with the work? And sort of reminding yourself of that. Number 3, taking care of yourself physically. Very important. Running, in my case, but any other kinds of exercise to sort of work out your emotions, but also to be strong, to feel strong and be strong so that you can face the next challenge. And I think this was ultimately the meaning for me. Every person, every story, every human being who has not been heard, who is now suddenly talking to you to tell you his or her story, deserves the same compassion, the same ability to listen as anyone else. And so you have to be ready. It's almost like being in training. So I saw myself basically in training. When I come back and it would be tough, I was training myself up so that I was ready for the next one, because they deserve that. And I think, this is something I came up on my own, this thing I'm just saying to you, but it really worked for me. I think people handle it in different ways, so maybe you'll have another answer to that. I want to get back to Zach and see if there's anybody else, if maybe our guest is back.
I'm not sure she is, but we do have a written question coming
Okay.
from Steve, who is wondering about the possible ethical dilemma that may come up when an interview subject is requesting to see the questions ahead of time of an interview, and how you might handle that situation.
Right. I never in my career have ever allowed an interview subject to see my questions ahead of time. It doesn't happen. Should never happen. Unacceptable. That's not journalism. That's PR. That's whatever, but it's not. You can say, I'm going to ask you in general about this subject and this subject. And you can probably give it even more if somebody says, well, are you going to ask me about X? I said, yes, I have to ask you about X. But you don't show them the way you're going to ask them. You don't show them the words of how you're going to ask them. That's not good, because if you do that, then they can come up with a preconceived answer, especially if you're talking to somebody about something where you're challenging them. That's just verboten. You just don't do it. I've been asked many times by people if I would submit questions, and the answer is no. And if that means I lose the interview, I lose the interview. I'm not going to do it. I won't do it. That just crosses the line. So the answer is no. Okay, that's a good question. I hope I made that clear. I think I did. Myra, let's go to Myra and then we'll go back to our panel.
Yes, so we have a live question from Irene.
Hi,
She's
Irene.
from Maryland.
Okay.
Hi there. Hi, Anne. It's a real honor to meet you. Thank you, everyone, my fellow Eagles at AU. Wonderful. My question for you, Anne, is, so I work for World Wildlife Fund. I'm a video producer and an editor over there. And one of the discussions that we're having now is on local communities and building trust and inclusive storytelling. So this has become really a real big issue for us, because we're going into local communities, marginalized communities all over the world, trying to tell their stories, right? But it's their stories, it's their voice. And we just want to provide essentially a platform. So my question to you is, how can, big NGOs like WWF do this in a way that is less intrusive, where we maybe, go and spend time with them without any of the camera gear, and just sit and listen to the problems, the conflicts, so that we can be of true support, rather than just trying to, meet our quotas of the stories and the videos that we need to get. This is a huge discussion. And I know I'll be reporting back to our CEO on this. So I'm very much looking forward to your answer. Thank you.
Well, it's a good question. And I think, though it doesn't sound like it's in the realm of journalism, it does sound like you're trying to document something that's true, from these people who have experiences you want to share with others. And I guess I would probably not go in early to talk to them and then go back with the camera. I guess if you're thinking about videotaping them or documenting them with an audio tape or something, I would do what I would do. I might actually, there are these inexpensive video cameras or inexpensive still cameras that you could, if there's somebody in particular who has a really important story, one idea I would suggest is to give them those things and say that we're going to let you have this for 30 days or something, and let them take pictures of their life or their world. And it's amazing what you'll get. It's amazing. Oftentimes I've done this before, what you can get. If however, what you want them to talk about is unrelated to something that they can document themselves. Then I guess what I would say is that you want to go in with a camera. You don't want to miss something by having them tell you something and then try to have them tell you it again, because when they first tell it to you, it'll be more honest, more true, less practice, more, and you can go back if you wanted to twice or 3 times. Oftentimes really significant interviews, you do want to, in journalism, you want to interview someone, say 60 Minutes, we'll interview somebody several times, asking similar questions, and then figuring out what the truth is, right? How they change the word here or change the word there. And it's basically about almost like carving marble to get at what's really real inside of it. So I would suggest maybe going in with a camera and just getting them used to the camera, showing them, sometimes if I've gone in country, I've shown people what they look like through the camera because they've not seen a camera before. In other words, sort of create a kind of comfort. And then I would really talk about why you're there, what your purpose is, and see if that aligns with something that they feel some purpose to. And then I would ask them, but basically what you're really talking about is what is the research you should be doing to understand how to document people in a culture, it sounds like, or a place where you don't know, that you don't know how things work. And so you might need to have someone on the ground who really understands more than you do, who can give you it. So that's where I would do the groundwork. That person, or having research and or lots of communications with people on the ground to understand the culture, the issues, the rules, then you can operate more clearly. I understood when I went into Darfur that, and one of the reasons why it was difficult for people to capture the story before we went is that women didn't talk to men. It was just not acceptable that women would talk to a male reporter. I, being a female reporter, went in, but then I was going to ask them about, sexual violence, which is a very tough subject. So how do you get them to talk about sexual violence, which is also extremely not okay, right? So eventually what I started to think about, and I learned, is that they sing, that emotion, that oftentimes in Sudan and some tribes, people will express their emotions through music. So I came together because of this research, right, that I figured out. And so what I did was I asked them if they could sing to me about the sorrow that they felt for themselves and for other women in this time. And what we documented were probably 30 or 40 women singing one, then another, then all together, and ending up weeping, talking. And the song was very revealing of what they were experiencing and how who they target and how they blamed Omar al-Bashir, the president of Sudan, for this. So in other words, figuring out the cultural, the way people in that culture will speak about the subject that you want to document, figuring out and honoring. And also the last thing I would say to you is humility. Humility in a journalist is a great trait. Hubris is not. Humility, somebody is going to share their story. They're going to tell you something of their culture or of their experience. You should be humble. you should be humbled by that. And when you come to it with that, you will come to it aware of what you don't know, and as a result, or open to what you don't know, and as a result, you will ask better questions and get better information. Okay, now it's, oh gosh, already 1 o'clock. So I'm going to say, I'm going to continue on answering more questions for as long as anybody can hang out. Before I do that, I'm going to thank everyone so far for their questions. And I really want to thank Myra Patrick and Zach Hill, the co-producers of this seminar, and everyone else on our Empowering Truth team, Cami, Sophia, Allison, Chanel, and Julia. And they've been led all by Christina Barnes, who's our master in chief for producing these 5 seminars we've done in defense of truth. And I want to thank the Sign Institute and American University for inviting me to teach. It has been a true pleasure. And before I continue answering more questions, I just want to say to everyone, keep doing everything you can, everyone, to help truth rise, and therefore all of us. Let's see, John, do you have another question?
Oh, of course. I have loads, but limited time. If it's okay, I'll come at you with a little bit of a harder question about the industry. So, according to U.S. labor statistics, journalism, news, and reporting, you're in the top 20% of earners if you're earning more than $60,000 a year in print, and you're in the top 20% of earners if you're earning more than $80,000 a year in broadcast. And I've been told numerous times, and completely agree with it, that no one really gets into this industry for the money. You have as we've talked about in numerous parts of this seminar, there's a driving factor of a search for truth and of storytelling and of being able to help communities demonstrate what they're going through. But I wanted to know how you think that interplays with just the raw facts of life in the United States and elsewhere. I mean, in the US, our average household income hovers somewhere between 60 and 80,000 for a 34-hour work week. And I have talked to a few journalists who a 34-hour work week would be laughable. So how do you think our industry is trying to sort of overcome that gap? And do you think we've broken down somewhere?
Are you talking about a gap of that the people we're covering earn less money than we are? Is that what you're saying?
More just the gap of a number of journalists that I talk to don't feel that they're able to hold journalism as a sole career.
Oh, I see.
From a factual, realistic, financial point of view. And my vantage point, this is trending out of stats and into opinion, but my vantage point is that very much harms journalism, not having it be able to be your only focus, being able to dedicate those 60 plus hours a week towards research and interviews, et cetera.
Right. I mean, when I became a budding journalist, it was, I think I may have earned, 19, maybe less, maybe something between $15,000 and $19,000 a year. And I didn't get into it, obviously, thinking that you'd make any money at it. I think that we're in a time now when it's very difficult for journalism because financially it's figuring itself out. It's reinventing itself with the onslaught of the digital revolution and the struggles. And so what you have is sort of these extremes where people can do very well, cannot do very well, and there's sort of this middle, and it's constantly changing. And a lot of really good journalism is actually happening from nonprofit journalist organizations, which also probably don't pay as much money. But I think this is going to all change. I don't know that it's going to become an extremely lucrative job unless you're an owner or you're a founder. I suppose that's really possible. But certainly different. There are extremes in it where people can do extremely well financially. But I think it's kind of like, I think we're going through, it's not going to stay the way it is because it can't. And so I guess it's a leap of faith to figure out what it will be and whether it's a way, but I think it's going to be something that people can make a living at. And I think the bigger issue has been in journalism that the people who are journalists make more money than a lot of the people they cover. And I think this has become a real issue, where you have, in general, people who are journalists have had a college degree. In general, a lot of people they cover don't have a college degree. And there's a real, an inability to sort of see what America really looks like when you come to it with just the sort of ivory tower view, right? And I think that has been a problem for journalists. So I think the more journalists are aware, connected, living in communities with all kinds of people, the better they'll be as journalists. But to answer your question, I mean, I don't have an answer for the future, the financial future of journalism. But it seems that more and more organizations are, you've got big news organizations like the New York Times doing extremely well financially right now. And you've got, these sort of nonprofits coming up, and you've got this sort of middle ground where people aren't sure what's happening and there's a real struggle. I guess if I were starting today, I probably would want to work at a nonprofit, to be honest with you. If I was brand new, just starting, I would want to make sure I had I wanted to make sure I practiced the foundational ideals that journalism should have. And then as I went into sort of these places like the New York Times or other places, which are not nonprofit, to make sure that I was strong about my ideals so that I could do the work and get paid, right? do the right work and get paid. That's probably the path I would probably take if I were starting today.
I'll follow up a little bit. Last seminar, we were talking about conflict reporting, and I brought up freelancers and the sort of the ability to support freelancers, especially in conflict reporting. But I think this highlights it as well. Do you think that for-profit institutions having so much of their content developed by freelancers that they aren't sort of in a higher order responsible for is part of that issue?
Yeah, I think it is. I think, but I don't know that that's going to be sustainable either. I think this period of time that we're in. I just don't know how it's going to all shape. I guess we are in a revolution, and the digital revolution, but that's caused a revolution in journalism, and I don't know how it's going to shake out. It is. You're absolutely right that the problem of using freelancers, especially in foreign reporting, creates its own issues, problems. Yeah, I wish I had an answer for you in terms of how to make money in journalism, but I guess what I would say, or have a living in journalism, I guess what I would say is that you probably want to end up at an organization that can't afford you, and work for that day. And then before you get there, to make sure that you're good enough to get there. And being good enough to get there is not making sure you've had other jobs that pay you money. It's really about, do you know what you're doing? And journalism is not something you just learn in school. It's something you have to practice. You have to practice and practice and practice so that you have the skills, so that when somebody comes at you with a lie, you're less vulnerable because you understand how to handle that lie. It's like a muscle. And that's why they call journalism a practice. You practice journalism. It's not something you ever really are 100% perfect at. You're constantly practicing because you are a human being reporting about human beings for human beings, right? So there's always this vulnerability, but because you love it so much, you keep pushing for it. And when you love it so much and you keep pushing to be better at it, you get really good at it, and you're more likely to be paid for it. So it's that kind of, you kind of almost do it because you can't not. Okay, Myra, do you have another question?
Yes. So I have two questions for you. The first is to assure the integrity of an interview. How should one assure that their own political views basically don't become a problem in the interview? And then the second one is, do you plan to write a novel? Because you have great way with words.
Well, I appreciate the last one. I have actually started considering it, so we'll see, to write a novel. But in terms of the first question, it's a very important question. I think you're constantly checking yourself, right? I think it's all human beings have bias. We just have them. We grew up with them. We develop them over time. But they're also, if you, and not to get really religious, but in the Bible there is the story of Solomon, right? How did Solomon think? How was he able to stay thoughtful, right? So it's about, in all of us, we have this ability to sort of say, okay, stop being, listen, let's look for what's true. And what happens in journalism is that rather than sort of be blinded by your bias, you're supposed to sort of keep pushing out and being open to what's really true. If you're seeking the truth, if seeking the truth is your North Star, then and that means that I'm asking you questions. I'm going to make sure my questions are not loaded, right? You take out usually if you see adjectives, words like even, always, never, those tend to be pejorative words. Pejorative words, take them out in your writing, in your questioning. Ask yourself, am I saying this because I think this, or what is really true? Right? Keep pushing yourself. And I think that's really what it is. You become really good at practicing. And in this way, oftentimes learning past your bias. And that's what's real, you start to see things differently. I've actually, to answer this question directly, you can get so good at this that you don't know what you think. I've gotten so good at asking questions so that I would, and reporting a story, that when somebody afterwards says to me, well, so what's your opinion? I have to stop and think about it. Well, what is my opinion about that? Well, because you've gotten in that frame. Do you see what I'm saying? And I think that is a place, it's possible in human beings for us to get in that frame. It doesn't say that we have no bias or we have no opinions. Oftentimes journalists have a lot of opinions, but can you be in that frame of fairness? Can you be in that frame? Can you work in that frame? And I can tell you that you can. You absolutely can, but you have to practice doing it, and you have to it's like a muscle, like I said. And if you don't work in that frame, then you don't necessarily get the truth, because you're coming at it from a point of view. If you come at things from a point of view, from a bias, from a perspective, from an agenda or whatever, you are only going to see things through that sieve. If you want the truth, if the truth is your North Star, then you have to open up to what other people think and other people say. Okay, looks like Zach, you're up. What's next?
Yeah, so we have a question from Samira, who is wondering, as a journalist who clearly values free speech, what your views are on Section 230 reform are, which I believe is referring to the internet law that protects owners of online platforms from being held accountable for anything illegal or unethical that are being posted by users of their platform.
Well, I think that newspapers and broadcasters are limited in terms of what they allow to be published. Is it free speech? If I, as a newspaper publisher, now a publisher owner, they're not journalists, okay? Owners and publishers are not journalists. They are owners and publishers. They are people who make money from the content, which is different from how a journalist looks at information, right? So that's number one. Number two, should a publisher of any newspaper or the owner of any broadcasting news organization allow someone to lie, put out a bunch of stuff that is untrue on their platforms? No, there already are limits. So what's new is that major internet companies, say it's Facebook or Twitter, whatever. These are places like newspapers where people publish information. All of us, we're all publishers publishing information. But right now, unlike newspapers and other news organizations, other platforms, journalism platforms, there are no limits except for recent ones imposed on information that is published. You know, I don't think that these platforms are a public square in the sense that they're a place where people outside are all having a party and anybody can say what they want to say. I think these are publishing platforms. And as such, if there is information that is dangerous, information that can harm others, information that is in that vein of dangerously untrue, it can sort of create human suffering. It must be limited. And I'm a proponent of free speech. I've defended the truth and I've defended free speech, but I don't defend anyone's ability to cause harm to others. And my father was a career military man. My brothers both served in the military. I've lost a brother in the military, and they defended, as my father would say, America and its right and our right to say what we want. He used to say to me, you know, I disagree with you, but I defend your right to say it. But I don't think anything that someone says that harms somebody else or causes damage or danger to somebody else should be defended. I don't think that's the American way, and I don't think that's free speech. I think that's a crime, so it should be stopped. So that's where I make the line. People can say what they want to say that's in disagreement to other people, but they should not be allowed to say what can be damaging or dangerous to other people. Okay, Myra, do you want to jump in, or should we go to anybody else if anybody else on the panel or anybody else has a question?
So there's some more questions in the chat. So someone says, how do you convince someone who is reluctant to do an interview to agree to do one on camera? Right.
I've had this problem a lot. Look, you respect them for their decision. If they don't want to do, are you saying on the record or on camera? In other words, they're willing to do an interview, but they're not willing to go on camera? Is that the question?
Yes.
Well, if they're willing to do an interview, then you get that information. And if you simply want to put them on camera, then I guess I would, if they're on the record off camera, but they don't want to go on the record on camera, then I would just simply say, look, it'll really help in the storytelling. Your voice will be better heard. I'll be able to use more of it, but if they're not willing to go on the record, if that's what the question is, then I would say, I would be a little more firm. I would say, because you can only use so much off the record information. As I mentioned earlier, I believe in the rule of three in terms of making sure you have 3 off the record people before substantiating what you're saying before you use it. There's only so much of that you can report, right? So, but I also think that, I go back to what, if it's not on the record, it's not really documented. And if it's not documented, it didn't really happen, or it didn't, and nobody really said it. It's always off the record. So the strength of the power of a story often is that somebody stands behind it. The power of words is greater when somebody can stand behind those words. And that means being on the record. I don't try to force people on camera if they don't want to. People are shy, people don't want to do that. But being on the record or off the record, I'm a little more firm that you should definitely push people to be on the record. But it's their decision ultimately. And if they say something to you off the record, you need to defend if they've said that to you before they've made their comments, look, this is off the record, then it's off the record. You've got to honor that, be responsible for that. That's a promise. Okay, Zach.
Yeah, so on a bit of a different note, we have a question about career advice. So Natalie is wondering, do you think that graduate school in journalism is necessary for a career in journalism?
No, I didn't go to graduate school in journalism. I have a degree in journalism and I've had a career in journalism. So no, it's not necessary, but I think it's important. It can be very helpful because I think you'll learn more deeply some of these fundamental ideals in journalism. And and it also is an opportunity to kind of develop some of the skills. You know, you make a lot of mistakes when you begin as a journalist. Everyone does. You know, you maybe didn't check a fact. You may not be perfect at interviewing people at the beginning. You may not have done a good job staying within the confines to keep your bias out of your reporting. Those things are probably more likely to be ironed out if you go to graduate school in journalism. So I see real value in it, but I don't think it's required. Okay, Myra.
All right, our next question is from Mary. So how do you find the courage or resolve to ask a question that you know may anger or make the person you are interviewing uncomfortable?
Well, that's part of the job. You know, your job is not to be popular. Your job is to get the truth. Again, if your job is to get the truth, then you have to ask hard questions. It's not fun. It really isn't sometimes. But if you're trying to get the truth, then you can ask them. And you ask them as a human, you know, I'm asking you as a human being, you know, what happened to the missing city funds that you were in charge of managing? Do you want to explain what happened? How do you explain this to the people who are taxed in your city? You ask these in direct, somewhat emotionalist, trying to sort of just look, this is your opportunity to explain what people are asking. Here's your opportunity to explain what's going on. In other words, it's almost like you give them an opportunity to explain a controversy. But no, you can ask very tough questions. I've asked really hard questions of people. You know, why are you murdering your own people, of Omar al-Bashir? But I guess one way to answer your question better, Myra, the question that's being asked better, is you're not asking them for you. You're asking them for the people who are reading and watching and hearing your reporting. You're asking them for the people. Ultimately, what really helped me in all those moments was that I never really thought that I was working for me or for the people who paid my check. I was working for the people who watched, heard, or read my material. I'm working for the people. And when you work for the people, you ask for the people. And when you're asking questions for the people, you can ask some pretty hard questions because you're standing in front of people and you're saying, okay, this is what America needs to know. Let me ask you this. Does that answer the question, do you think, Myra? It's really about, if you're asking on behalf of people, you're not alone up there. You're asking because people need to know the answer to this question. Okay, Zach?
Yeah, so we have a question that is very specific to you, coming from Kenneth, who says you are a very disciplined person and obviously a clear and thoughtful communicator. And he's wondering how possibly being from a military family shaped your development and career as a journalist.
That's a very good question. You know, in the military, there's a lot of right and wrong, very clear ideas about ethics, in my experience. And because journalism is really ultimately what makes a great journalist, what defines a great journalist more than anything is integrity, in addition to everything else, but integrity number one. I think being from a military family made that pretty clear. I'm pretty clear about what's right and wrong. I mean, I see shades of gray and all that kind of stuff, and I listen to the others, but you know, I know pretty quickly what I'm not going to do and what I'm going to do. And when I hear that I shouldn't lie, when I shouldn't cheat, when I shouldn't, if somebody says off the record, it's not off the record, it's off the record. You know, you maintain that honor, loyalty, integrity, those kinds of things. Boom, it's easy because I've learned that from my father and from, you know, growing up in that world. But also, I think traveling. In a military family, you move around a lot, and I moved every couple of years. I'm also because of the military. My mother is from one country, from Japan. She's become an American citizen. My father's from Colorado, from the Midwest. So I've got like this. So that has helped me be open. I grew up in the military among people of all races, so I'm very easy, comfortable around people of all different races. I grew up also in a not wealthy way. One of 5 kids on a military salary, had 2 dresses. I mean, that idea has actually helped me because you talk to all kinds of people who don't have stuff. And if you don't know how to talk to them, it's really hard to do your job. So I feel like being in the military and growing up in the military has really, my father being in the military and me growing up in the military has really helped me a great deal in being a better reporter. But I think probably if people grew up in a political family, maybe they'd be a better political reporter. So depending on your background, you might be able to figure out if there's a part of your background that makes you better at a particular kind of reporting. I wouldn't preclude not growing up in a military family in terms of whether or not it makes you a good reporter. You can find a path because ultimately, if truth is your North Star and there's something you know about, say your parents are scientists, or you studied science, maybe you are a science reporter. You can think about it in that particular way. Okay, I see John's back. Hey, John, do you have another question?
No, of course. I mean, we're just going way over, so I'll keep it rolling as long as you have time.
I do.
But with bringing up the military as an aspect of sort of background for reporting, obviously I have very heavy ties to that. Both my wife and I served for the past decade, basically. And so I wanted to know what your thoughts are on trying to avoid having conflict of interest. There was, I actually was able to interview Kaj Larson. I don't know if you're familiar with him or his work, but he's done a lot of work for CNN and Vice News on conflict reporting, and he's a former Navy SEAL. He completely has sworn off reporting on the US military because of that, and because he doesn't want to show or develop any conflict of interest in his reporting. And I wanted to know what you thought on that.
No, I don't agree with it. I think if you have been a Navy SEAL and you know a lot about the military, then you should help us all understand more about the military. I think that, you talked about you having experienced in the military. There's a lot that most people don't know. And so why shouldn't you let that knowledge be a part of your reporting? Now, bias is a different matter. Can you report on this in a manner and that's about practice. If you don't have the ability to do it without bias, without sort of being unduly influenced by sort of promoting something about it, then I can understand why you would say, okay, I'm not going to do that right now. But you should, if you're going to be a journalist, you should practice an ability to report fairly. And if you can't do that, then why are you a journalist? Why are you not in public affairs or, some other kind of media? Journalism is a particular kind of media which aims for truth. And the more you know about something, the more you should report about it. But you need to develop, and everyone can, I think, if they have a mind to do it, if they want to do it, if they practice doing it, can develop an ability to look at things fairly. Just like Solomon did in the Bible, look at it fairly. Be open to what you don't know. Be humble about what you don't know. Ask, don't have a narrative in your head that you're trying to prove. The word objective is not a very popular word these days because people recognize that it's very hard to be objective, and it's very hard to even know if anyone can truly be. But should you not try to be? Of course you should try to be. Going for truth, right? It's not that there are always two sides of a story. Sometimes truth is not always fair, right? But if you don't look for it fairly, you're not going to find it. And you as a person who served in the military, if you know information about the military, if that experience has informed your awareness, then you should report about it. There's no way you should step away from that, I think, unless you feel like you can't be fair. But I think since you're studying journalism, I think you probably can. All right, so Myra, do you have another question?
Yes, so we have our last question, and it's, do you study the techniques of other interviewers? And if so, what does that look like for you? And what can you use in your own work from them?
Right. I think you do. I think I remember reading books about interviewing written by interviewers in the past, and to kind of get an idea of how things would work, because it was hard. I think we don't really think about the interviews, how important they are. So anyway, yes, I do. I watch interviews all the time, and I can see, and you learn techniques as you go, and you get better and better as you go. And you also get better and better from your own experiences doing it. Different people take questions in different ways. It's a very, it's not a simple, do these things and it'll always work. Different people hear questions differently. And this is actually part of the excitement about it, discovering somebody different, talking to somebody new who has a new way of looking at something, who will respond to a positive question or a negative question, a challenging question differently, and sort of finding a new way of asking and hearing. I think this is the challenge. It's actually been one of the great things. Talking to people has been one of the great joys of journalism for me. Interviewing has been one of the great joys of journalism for me, because you're able to sort of connect with somebody else, even someone who you're asking very tough questions of. There's a way to connect, and if you're gathering information in an earnest, honest way, motivated with pure intentions, it's often one of the greatest joys to connect and hear someone fully. So I appreciate the question, Myra. And Myra and Zach, thank you so much. You've done so great. I love working with you and the entire team. And thank you everyone who is still listening and for your questions. And hopefully you've benefited in some manner from our seminars. Thank you again. Bye-bye.